In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Mjolnir has undoubtedly proven itself to be a powerful weapon, but it was destroyed rather easily by Hela in 2017's Thor Ragnarok. Moreover, as of 2018's Avengers Infinity War, Thor acquired a new weapon, the mighty Stormbreaker, which made his iconic warhammer look like a toy in comparison. But in the comics, Mjolnir is far more powerful than the MCU version. In fact, it's far more powerful than the MCU version of Stormbreaker too. The scale of the powers Mjolnir is shown in the MCU aren't even close to the version in the source material. And perhaps more importantly, the comic book version has a plethora of additional powers that the live-action version simply doesn't possess. In this video, we'll show you why Mjolnir is far more powerful than you thought. Okay, so let's start off by comparing the powers MCU Mjolnir has shown on screen with the same powers in the comic books. First, the power of the worthiness enchantment, which, to be fair, is actually relatively close in both cases. The main difference is that there are more powerful characters in the comics, so comic book Mjolnir is proven to resist the efforts of a more impressive array of individuals. But that's not to say MCU Mjolnir wouldn't do the same if more powerful characters had tried to move it. But the comic book version of the weapon is proven too powerful for Zeus himself to overcome, and it even tore itself out of the mighty god's set to return to Thor's hand. In terms of striking power, the MCU version of the hammer really can't hold a candle to the version in the source material, and that's putting it mildly. While the live-action version has proven enough to affect the likes of the Hulk, Surtur in his non-giant form, and even Thanos when wielded by Captain America, comic book Mjolnir just flat out hits harder. It's completely atomized the tank, knocked out the Phoenix Force entity, knocked over and hurt the planet-devouring Galactus, and has even destroyed planets with the sheer force of its impact. Another power that MCU Mjolnir possesses, but which pales in comparison to its comic book counterpart, is the power of flight. We've seen Chris Hemsworth's Thor using Mjolnir to fly around at relatively quick speeds, and while we can't really gauge exactly how fast he's traveled in the movies, we know for a fact it's nowhere near as fast as the son of Odin travels in the comics. You see, comic book Mjolnir allows Thor to travel at genuinely faster than light speeds. In fact, he's been known to travel multiple times the speed of light thanks to his trusty hammer. Moreover, such is the force at which Mjolnir is capable of propelling Thor, it can even resist the force of a black hole, which for example enabled him to save the Red Hulk from one of the incalculably powerful cosmic phenomenon when he looked doomed. Now, the final prominent ability that MCU Mjolnir has that we're going to compare to the comic book version is the ability to manipulate the weather, which of course includes channeling lightning. In the MCU, we know Thor can summon and use lightning without his mighty hammer, or indeed without Stormbreaker, because Odin said as much in 2017's Thor Ragnarok. But Mjolnir certainly seems capable of channeling lightning more accurately than Thor can on his own, and quite possibly of amplifying the intensity of the lightning. With Mjolnir, we've seen Thor's lightning taking out multiple gigantic Chitauri leviathans as they arrived in New York through a portal in the sky. We've seen it taking down Ultron's drones, fire demons, and it even subdued Thanos temporarily when Steve Rogers was wielding it, although it didn't really do the Mad Titan any lasting damage. In the comics, however, it's a different story entirely. The lightning channeled by Mjolnir is highly potent, to say the least. It's flat out killed the giant wolf Fenrir, and it's cracked the icy realm of Jotunheim in half. In fact, it's even proven capable of hurting Vision while he was intangible, as well as being able to affect beings who exist on a different dimensional plane. We've also seen the Mjolnir of the MCU cause basic rain showers and create a tornado that lifted the destroyer armor into the air. But the comic book version can do so much more when it comes to the weather, and on a much greater scale. It's been known to create storms that engulf entire planets, and has even been known to summon the winds of 1,000 worlds all at once. But what truly sets the comic book version of Mjolnir apart from its MCU counterpart is the fact that it has a huge array of additional powers that the MCU version doesn't possess at all. We've seen MCU Mjolnir block and deflect energy before, such as in Thor's brief fight against the Destroyer armor in his 2011 solo movie. But the comic book version can both block and absorb massive amounts of energy on a much higher scale than that. It's done things like absorbed blasts from the Silver Surfer, Hyperion's atomic vision, the fires of Hades themselves, and Thor was even convinced it could absorb the blast of a planet planet-busting explosion. It's also capable of draining the life energy from living beings, firing energy back at its original wielder at 100 times its original power, and firing beings made of energy into the sun. Mjolnir is also capable of manipulating a number of fundamental forces of the universe, such as the electromagnetic spectrum, like Magneto does, and gravity like Graviton. But when it comes to energy-style attacks, comic book Mjolnir isn't only capable of firing lightning. In fact, it has several other energy-based attacks, namely the Thermoblast, the Anti-Force, and the most powerful of them all, the incredibly potent God Blast. The Thermoblast comes from within the hammer and is capable of destroying entire planets and beings as powerful as Ego, the living planet. The Anti-Force is simply an energy that counteracts another force, and it's worked on everything from magic to energy of a cosmic nature. But the one that's really worth talking about, however, is the God Blast, which taps into Thor's own life force via the hammer. While Thor can execute a God Blast with his bare hands, it's certainly a more potent weapon when it's channeled through Mjolnir. It sent the Juggernaut, whose power is that nothing can stop him once he gets moving, back in the opposite direction, and it even forced Galactus to flee as the Planet Devourer believed it would kill him. It can also manipulate energy for defensive purposes incidentally, as it's been shown capable of generating powerful force fields, which is a far more effective method of blocking an attack than simply putting the actual hammer in the way of it like Thor is forced to do with it in the MCU. And that brings us to the more exotic, esoteric, and downright fancy powers possessed by comic book Mjolnir. You may have gotten the impression that it's just a blunt instrument of destruction, but that's really not the case at all. It's got an abundance of truly crazy abilities. Let's start with Transmutation, a power more associated with characters like Molecule Man, the Silver Surfer, Apocalypse, and sorcerers like Dormammu. So, for example, Thor has used Mjolnir to transmute the Absorbing Man into helium, and to transmute a pyramid into an orchard. So yeah, if Thor wanted to, he could basically use Mjolnir to turn you into a teapot. And you know how Thor can use Mjolnir to fly? Well, that's not the only way he can use it to travel around, because there are 3 other types of travel Mjolnir enables him to do. The first is basic teleportation, meaning he can move between places without having to physically travel the length of the journey between them. In fact, he doesn't even need to know exactly where he's going. He can just tell Mjolnir to take him somewhere with a vague description, and it'll do so without question. The second is dimensional travel. Mjolnir can take Thor to anywhere he needs to go in an instant, even if the place in question doesn't exist on the same plane as his starting point. So, for example, he can easily travel to Dormammu's dark dimension. But that ability is also useful for defeating troublesome enemies, or getting him and those around him out of sticky situations. For instance, he once sent Ymir and Surtur to the Dimension of Death, and sent a nuclear missile to a distant dead world in the same way. The final method of travel that Mjolnir is capable of, or at least used to be capable of, is one that recent viewers of Avengers Endgame will be familiar with, and that's time travel. In recent years in the comics, the hammer has actually lost this ability because Immortus asked Thor to use it to save the planet Phantus and bring it back out of limbo and into the space-time continuum, and that resulted in it being drained of its temporal abilities, but there's every chance they could return in the future. In the past, Thor could spin Mjolnir faster than light to enter the 4th dimension of time, and that allowed him to travel to any year he wished to visit. Now, you may remember in Thor Ragnarok that Thor was able to magically make Mjolnir look like an umbrella, so he blended in with the general public. Well, in the comics, Mjolnir can go one better, because it can turn both itself and Thor completely invisible, although this really isn't something that's been done very often. Finally, one of the more bizarre powers Mjolnir possesses, and frankly one of the least useful, is the ability to project a physical form. Although we do get the feeling MCU Thor would like Mjolnir to be able to do that. In the comics, it actually only showed this ability when Jane Foster was Thor, when it did indeed create a physical form for itself and move and speak like a regular person. But it wasn't something it could do for very long. In fact, it had to spend years recharging the required energy to do it again. But it was interesting because it was able to chat with Foster about why it chose her as its wielder, and given that she was dealing with cancer at the time, it was pretty heartfelt and meaningful, even if the ability wasn't able to help her one bit when it came to fighting. Believe it or not, we haven't even covered every ability Mjolnir is displayed in the comics in this video, and if we did, it would take us all day because it's proven itself capable of doing hundreds of different things over the years. However, we definitely think we've proven that it's a lot more powerful than the Marvel Cinematic Universe would lead you to believe it is. It really is a lot more than just an enchanted hammer that hits really hard, enables Thor to fly, and which can control the weather to a limited degree. It's like an enchanted Swiss Army knife, or Thor's equivalent equivalent of the Doctor's sonic screwdriver, but multiplied by 1,000,000. It is genuinely one of the most powerful weapons in comics, and indeed in all of fiction, and Thor would be a far inferior hero without it. But there is still no doubt that in the coming years it will prove itself capable of even more amazing powers. Heck, given that time travel and now the multiverse have been introduced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we might even see it reappear there, hopefully with a bunch of new abilities that we'll get to see in live action. And you know what? We really can't wait to see them. Did you realize Mjolnir was this powerful? Did any of Mjolnir's comic book powers surprise you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to ScreenRant so you never miss out on any of our great new video uploads in the future. Farewell, Midgardians, and we'll see you next time.